It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Donald Trump has been calling for cutting taxes, lighter banking regulations, along with infrastructure spending as his key policies boosting the U.S. economy. Trump reiterated his plans to simplify the tax system as well as cut taxes and create jobs in a 60 Minutes interview aired on Friday with Leslie Stahl. Let's have a look.
And there was a major tax bill lowering taxes in this country. We're going to substantially simplify and lower the taxes.
Joining us now to talk about all of these economic consequences of a Donald Trump presidency is Heiner Flassbeck. Heiner Flassbeck is the director of Flassbeck Economics, a consultancy for global macroeconomic questions, and the editor of Macroscope, an internet magazine. He's also co-author of the new book Against the Troika, Crisis and Austerity in the Eurozone, which he co-wrote with Kostas Lapavitsas. Heiner, so good to have you back with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Heiner, how can Trump implement tax cuts that he's talking about in that clip and spend more money on infrastructure as he's proposing to do?
First of all, let's say tax cuts doesn't mean very much as long as you do not know who's going to be the beneficiary of the tax cuts. As far as I see, he's planning tax cuts for companies. That is really a bad idea and is clearly contradictory to the other idea of spending money for infrastructure. I'll explain that in a minute. Tax cuts as such doesn't mean very much. He says we simplify taxes. That every good conservative politician for the last 100 years says that we are going to simplify taxes. Unfortunately, it's never getting simpler because it's not simple. It's not simple to define what is a dollar earned or what is a euro earned. The tax rates as such are very simple. You can simplify the tax rates, but the main question is what is a dollar earned, and that is not so never simple in our complex society. The other thing that he's planning to do is spending money. That is in principle a good idea, depending a bit on what he's going to spend, but in principle, the US is in a situation where indeed there is a lot of money around on the capital markets. You find as much money as you want on the capital markets, and investing in the infrastructure is in principle a good idea. And I could imagine that he would go for a very large investment spending program in the way more or less as Reagan did in the 80s, which will have some consequences. But the first one will be a positive one. It will create jobs and it will create growth for the US economy for the next 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years.
Heiner, when Trump is talking about building infrastructure, is he talking about using public funds to build things, or is he talking about borrowing money to build things? And who does it benefit at the end of the day anyway? I mean, immediately it has an impact in terms of jobs and so forth. But on the long run, this type of thing usually benefits the corporations for the next 100 years, like building roads and charging us toll or building airports that they benefit from at the end of the day. Of course, it has some public value.
The point is rather simple. You can do it either way or the other way. He's also talking about public-private partnership, which is really a bad idea because it never works. They tried it in the UK, they tried it in Europe and Germany. It never works, so that would be the worst of all ideas to go for public investment. But if he does it in the proper way so that the government is spending money on infrastructure, let's say airports or railways, what it is, it will definitely have a positive effect on the economy. The long-term effects are a different question, but first of all, it will create growth, it will create jobs, it will create incomes. And so far, if he does that consistently and at a large scale, then he can succeed in producing growth. You see, the point is in the US economy, as well as many other European economies, we have a structural problem, let me call it a structural problem, which is that the company sector nowadays, for the last 5, 6 years, is a net saver. which creates a strange kind of market economy. It's not a market economy anymore, because the original idea is that private households are saving and the companies are taking the money and they're investing the money. Now the companies are also net savers. For a huge closed economy like the United States, that implies, it really implies, either you get the company sector back to a net debtor position, but that obviously does not work if you cut taxes for the companies. But then it would be maybe better to increase taxes. But nobody has ever tried that. Nobody has ever tried a policy to bring the company sector back into a debtor position. But if you don't do that, then the only alternative is indeed that the government spends money and it takes it from the capital market. I mean, our interest rates are zero. For a government taking money from the capital market and doing useful things, there is no cost. There is no cost involved, because governments never pay back their debt. It's a stupid idea that governments would pay back their debt. They never do that. And if they have zero interest rates, so the cost is zero. And if you can do a lot of good with a cost of zero, then you should do it. But it should obviously include other things like climate change, like education, where the government can spend a lot of money, and environment protection in general, and so on. So there are an enormous amount of things out there that can be done, and there's an enormous amount of money that can be used.
Right. Now, traditionally, the Republican Party has been against any sort of deficit in the public treasury. So does that mean that we're going to be faced with cuts in other areas, like social spending, in order to create this money for public infrastructure?
No, I don't think so. If I look back at the history of the Republican Party, then they were always, they forgot all the principles in the very moment that their president took over, at the very day, so to say. Remember, I mentioned already Ronald Reagan, who spent enormous amounts of money out of debt from the capital market on the military. Think of George W., who spent enormous amounts for wars in the Middle East. It all came from the capital market. It was not money that was raised through taxation. It all came from the capital market. Now, if you don't do it for these dangerous things, but you spend the money for investment, and as I said, we have this new situation where the government is forced to spend with money from the capital market. That is a very new situation in the whole history of capitalism, so to say. In this situation, it makes absolutely sense that the government takes that money and spends it. The crucial question is, for what? But I am absolutely sure that the Republicans have no problem with spending money that they take from the capital market. That is just their rhetoric, but in the end, it will not stop them.
All right, and then there is also a question of the Republicans who have been trying to push through various austerity measures in the United States, cuts to social programs such as health care, also in terms of Social Security and so forth. Do you expect that the Trump government will be making cutbacks to these areas in order to create more money for other things that they're interested in, so like military spending?
I think that's not a question of money. That's not money is not the main reason if they do these cuts. That's for ideological reasons, because they want to cut the government back, and they want a lean government or a small government. They want to keep the government out of the markets and so on. That is a purely ideological point. For money, they don't need it. As I said, the money is easily available and could be used. The restriction they will run into, that is for us, for Europe, and for the rest of the world, an interesting question. If they do it like Reagan, they will run into a certain restriction after a time, because they, with this additional growth in the United States, the current account deficit will explode, as it did in the mid of the 80s. And then comes the question, what about free trade? Are they keeping the Republicans, their traditional free trade ideas, or is Trump overtaking that and say, well, let's the others should not benefit from our boom, and we stop them. We either talk the dollar down on the international market, which is always a possibility for the U.S. government, or we indeed erect protectionist barriers, which could be for China and for Germany really a big problem, because those are the biggest surplus countries.
All right. And finally, Heiner, what do you expect the global reaction to this kind of shift in American governance from an Obama presidency to a Trump presidency?
Well, I think in Europe they're trying to find out what is going on. They will be surprised, in my view, how quick a government could do things that I described with money from the capital market. In Europe, they're absolutely shy to do that. They have a phobia against any kind of government debt, although we're in the same situation than the United States with this, what I described as company sector being on the saving side. So it is absolutely necessary everywhere in the world that we spend money. The big fight should be for what the money is spent, but I would not recommend to anyone to fight the spending of money as such. As you said, climate change is extremely important. Yeah, there you can spend billions and trillions of dollars if you want. But the problem is with Trump that he will, so to say, the whole thing will be overlaid by a very extremely conservative ideology concerning the role of the government in general, the role in healthcare and in social services, the role of the unions, and so on. But from the purely macro picture, I think he will produce something that from the other side is sometimes called the New Deal.
Right. And also this kind of shift to the right in terms of ideology is something that Europe is rather concerned about as well in terms of their own politics. What is your reaction to it?
Well, you see, the right-wingers in Europe are clapping their hands because they are happy that they saw such a revolution, so to say, in the United States. They're waiting for the next elections. We will see. But the big danger is indeed that Europe breaks apart because nationalists are taking over. They are, so to say, copying some of the ideas. They say, and some of the ideas, unfortunately, are not wrong. Some of the ideas are right. To spend money is a reasonable idea at this very situation, in particular in Europe much more than the United States. So it is as it has been in the last century. So the wrong people take the right ideas and do it with a big collateral damage on the side.
All right, Heiner, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.